Gather round, children, long after wait. There'll be fun and adventure for all. Story time with Cait. A world of imagination is there for you to take. All you gotta do is listen. It's story time with Cait. It's story time with Cait.
Hi boys and girls, welcome to the season finale of Storytime with Cait. That's me. Can you believe it? This is episode 10. Can't believe I've done a whole season. It's been awesome. Before we get to the finale though, I want to point out, sponsor, Storytime with Cait, is The Pumpkin Wizard. If you don't already own this book, I highly recommend you go out and pick up a copy for yourself. This month only, they're doing a very exclusive, very special promo deal. If you go to thepumpkinwizard.com and then put in Stop Bullying as the promo code, you can pick up this book 40% off. That is a great deal. Today I'm going to be reading The Heath Cousins and the Moonstone Cave. Woo! That could be pretty spooky. And if you'd like a copy of this book, just go to Amazon.com. The link is right here below to help you get there quicker. Type in The Heath Cousins and the Moonstone Cave. Only with your parents' permission, kids. And now, let's head on out to location. And now let's get to reading. The Heath Cousins and the Moonstone Cave by Eileen Hobbs. Chapter 1. Addie B. Addie B, whose whole and proper name was Adelaide Bennington Winifred Heath, after her grandparents on both sides of the family, sat next to her mother and father on an airplane, with her arms folded tightly across her chest. She had a very serious frown on her otherwise pleasantly freckled face. "Addie B," her mother asked gently, "why do you have such a sourpuss face?" "I don't want to spend the summer with those stupid boy cousins," Addie B huffed. "They'll probably chase me, play with frogs and gross things, and be really loud. I can't imagine having a bit of fun with them. How could you, Mum? How could you agree to spend 3 weeks with all of them?" "Addie B," her mother said again, a little more forcefully this time, "don't you know how special it is to be part of a larger family? I was an only child, and I was always so lonely. You're an only child too, at least for now. You should be glad to have some other kids to play with." "But they're all boys, Mum. What will we find to do together? The only thing we have in common is our last name." "I'm sure if you give it a chance, Addie B, you'll find you have a lot in common. Before long, you'll all be playing together happily, swimming in the ocean, and running around like best pals." Addie B didn't answer, but said, under her breath, something like, "Humph," because she did not believe her mother at all. She had only met the terrible cousins 1 or 2 times, once when she was a baby, and so she didn't remember that. The second time was about 3 years ago, when she was 9 years old. Thankfully, that was only for 1 week at Christmas, and there wasn't too much time to have to be with them. All the other times she had visited her grandparents' house, the cousins had not been there, and she had had the whole place to herself. But this time, she would be with 3 rowdy boys. Ugh. Jack, Beanie, and Bodie. What silly names, she thought. Addie B looked out her window and saw the clear blue ocean far beneath her. It really was beautiful from way up here. In a few hours, she would be landing on the east coast of America, and then to the summer beach house that the Heaths had been going to since her grandparents had been married. She thought of her grandmother longingly, her kindly dark brown eyes, like Addie's dad's. Her skin had still been smooth and tan due to her American Indian heritage. Her beautiful hair had turned white and had flowed down her back like a frothy wave. This time, for the first time, her wonderful Grandma Winnie would not be there to greet her, walk with her on the beach, and talk about the books they loved to read. How was she going to be there without her, Addie wondered. It hurt so much just to think about it. Addie leaned against the window of the plane and wiped away tears from her eyes. She must have been very tired, because after a few minutes, her eyes felt very heavy. With one last sweet thought of her grandmother, and several unkind thoughts about her cousins, Adelaide Bennington Winifred Heath fell fast asleep. Chapter 2. The Heath Boys. At the time that Addie B was dreaming peacefully high above them, the Heath boys were riding along in their bright red Jeep Cherokee, singing at the top of their lungs a song about blue cows and purple pigs. No one really knew what the song meant because Bodie, who was 6 years old, had just made it up, and no one ever quite knew what Bodie's songs were about. Nevertheless, his two older brothers, Beanie, who was 9, and Jack, who was 13, had been instructed by their parents to play along so there would be peace in the car until they reached Winston Cove. Bodie, however, was the first to give up. "Dad!" Bodie hollered from the back seat. "When will we be there?" "About an hour, Bodie," Spencer Heath called back. "You said an hour last time," Bodie whined. "That's because you just asked me 5 minutes ago, Bodie," his dad reminded him. "But look," Mr. Heath pointed out the left side of the car window. "I can see the ocean." All three boys turned abruptly to look out the window, and sure enough, peeping through the rows of trees along the road, they caught flashes of silver. "I can't wait to get there," Beanie piped up. "Just think, 3 whole weeks of running in the sand, playing in the ocean. Don't forget climbing rocks and exploring the caves," Jack added. "Yeah, and don't forget meanie old Addie B," Bodie added, pulling his brows together in a frown. "Bodie," his mom reprimanded him from the front seat, "you don't even know Addie B. You were just a toddler when you saw her last. What are you talking about?" Lily Heath turned around and frowned at her youngest son. "Yeah, but Beanie and Jack told me all about her. How she acted all stuffed up and all, and didn't want to play with them when she came for Christmas. And she talks all snooty like." "I said stuck up," Beanie corrected his younger brother. "Listen, boys." Mrs. Heath turned completely around to give her full attention to her sons. She still couldn't believe how different they looked. Beanie with his white blonde hair and blue eyes, Bodie with his shock of red hair that always stuck up like he had just been frightened, and Jack with his dark hair and eyes and beautiful tan skin, just like his father and grandmother Winnie. "I don't want to hear that kind of talk. Addie B is your only cousin. Take time to know her, and soon you'll all be getting along just great together. I'm sure of it. You know, the three of you can be a little scary sometimes. Maybe she's a little shy." Jack, who had been quietly thinking about what his mom said, muttered under his breath, "She's the scary one." Fortunately for Jack, his parents didn't hear him. They were too busy looking for the turnoff that would take them into the small town of Winston Cove on the beautiful east coast of Maine. It isn't even a town, Jack thought. Just a few old houses scattered down the beach. They had been going there every summer as long as he could remember. This would be the first time without his grandmother there. He couldn't believe she was gone. Bodie, who was still staring out the window in hopes of seeing the whole of the ocean, said quietly, "It sure won't be the same without Grandma Winnie there. I can still smell her fresh-baked cinnamon rolls." Before he could stop himself, a fat, salty tear began sliding down his cheek. Beanie, who was known for torturing his younger brother rather than comforting him, nevertheless reached out a hand and patted Bodie's small shoulder. "You're right, Bodie. It won't be the same at all." Chapter 3. Winston Cove. When Addie B and her parents drove up to her grandparents' house in Winston Cove, it looked just as she remembered it. It was a 2-story gray house with black shutters and a cozy porch that stretched across the whole front of the house. On the left-hand side of the porch was a white swing, an old wooden rocker, and a small round table. This, Addie remembered, was where she sat with her Grandma Winnie, swinging gently in the summer breeze and drinking freshly squeezed lemonade. Her heart suddenly felt so heavy she almost couldn't get out of the car. The house was so quiet she thought no one was there at first. It would be rather nice, she thought, not to face those Heath boys just yet. But then the silence was shattered. The screen door burst open, and the 3 Heath boys spilled out of the house. Bodie came first. He wore a red cape and a Peter Pan hat made of newspaper that sat precariously on his blond head. In one hand, he carried a wooden sword, and, in the other, a small wooden shield. He obviously couldn't decide whether or not to be a pirate, a rescue hero, or a knight, Addie B thought. Behind Bodie came Beanie, also brandishing an even bigger sword that gleamed with silver and gold. Beanie wore a silver crown made of paper on his bright red head. Several tufts of hair stood up above the crown. Finally came Jack, hanging back a little. Although he was just a year older than Addie, he seemed to tower over her. It is amazing how much he looked like Grandma Winnie, Addie thought with a pang. The younger Heath boys bounded up to their cousin like happy, eager puppies and started talking at once. "Hi, Addie B!" "Hey, Aunt Lil!" "Yeah, Uncle Simon!" Addie B stood motionless and fixed her cousins with a cold, hard stare. The boys suddenly froze, not knowing what else to say. The silence was broken by a familiar voice behind them. "Now, boys, let your cousin get used to being here first before you jump all over her." Addie B looked up to see her grandfather coming toward them. He came right up to her and put his arms around her. They were comfortable arms, and she instantly felt better. He wore his usual flannel shirt and jeans, and his blue eyes smiled down at her from a tanned, slightly wrinkled face. He was, Addie B thought, one of the handsomest men she had ever met, besides her father, of course. "Okay then," Jack said. "We're heading to the beach. Come find us later if you want." The Heath boys ran down the driveway and toward the blue-gray water, which was only a short distance from the house. Bodie's red cape flapped out behind him, and his chubby legs worked hard to keep up with his taller, faster brothers. "Remember the rules," Grandpa called after them. "Don't go in the water, and stay in the area in front of the house." "Okay, Grandpa," the boys called back in unison. "Now, young lady," Grandpa Heath said, "let's go in and get settled. You have your old room, you know." Addie B followed her grandpa and her parents into the big gray house. A sweet smell of cinnamon greeted her at the door. "Grandpa, I smell cinnamon rolls. Grandpa smiled at her. "Can you believe it? Grandma Winnie taught me how to make them. It's a great memory of her." Addie B looked around her at the familiar house. Directly in front of her were the stairs that led up to the bedrooms. To her left was a sitting room with comfortable white wicker chairs and a sofa made of soft, faded colors. Everywhere she looked, the sunlight streamed in through the huge windows. To her left was the dining room with a large rustic wooden table. Behind the dining room was the kitchen, and that's where the great smell came from. Upstairs, Addie went directly to the room that she knew was hers. It wasn't a big room, but she loved it. The bed was covered with a bright yellow quilt spotted with white daisies. Her grandma had made it just for her. A huge window looked out at the ocean, and there was a window seat under it where she loved to sit and read. On the bed, there was a teddy bear and a doll with brown hair, green eyes, and freckles. Addie B picked the doll up and hugged her. "Oh, Lady Anne, you're still here waiting for me. I'm so happy to see you." This was the doll Grandma Winnie had made for her. She felt sad and happy all at the same time. Opposite of the bed hung a faded picture of her Grandma Winnie. She was about 20 years old and wore a Native American outfit. Her long black hair was in braids and fell down the front of her dress past her waist. She had one black and white feather that stood up straight from her hair. In one arm, she held a fan made of black feathers and a small beaded purse. In the other, she held a red, white, and blue patchwork scarf. She wasn't smiling, but she was so beautiful and full of pride. Addie knew how important she had been in her tribe, and what a scandal it had been when she had married her grandfather. They had fallen in love and had been married for 40 years, until her grandmother's death last year. Next to the picture was a small oval mirror. She examined her own features, looking for some sign of her Native American heritage, but she found none. Instead, a girl with light brown hair, green eyes, and freckles looked back at her. How am I going to survive these 3 weeks without Grandma Winnie? She wondered. She decided to lie down for just a minute on her cozy bed. She felt suddenly very tired after flying all night on the airplane. Her eyes closed, and immediately she fell asleep. She had the strangest dream. She was in a room that was completely dark, except for a round, glowing object that looked like a luminous egg. When she reached out to touch it, it was hard and smooth. Suddenly, it started to move away from her down a long, dark tunnel. It seemed to want her to follow it, but she was afraid. She didn't remember the dream when she first woke up, but the details of it would come back to her soon. And she certainly would never have guessed that her dream was the first step in a mysterious journey she would soon take with the Heath boys. Chapter 4. A Magic Stone. When Addie B woke up the next morning, she went downstairs to find only her grandfather sitting at the big wooden table. He smiled at her. "Good morning, sleepyhead." "Hey, Granddad, where is everyone?" Addie rubbed her eyes sleepily and looked around. She couldn't believe she had slept all night. Everyone's down at the beach. I stayed to wait for you. How about a cinnamon roll? Her granddad asked. He placed a gooey, heavenly roll in front of her. If I remember correctly, these are your favorite. Addie smiled and took a big bite out of the roll. She sighed contentedly. It's really good, thank you. Her grandfather looked at her kindly. I know you miss her, he said. I do too. But your grandmother would not want you to be sad, Addie B. It's okay to be here and have a good time. Addie looked at her grandfather's kind face. He seemed to know just what she was thinking. She had been so close to Grandma Winnie. Addie was the only granddaughter, and they had had so much in common. They were both smart, of course. They both loved to read. And, of course, they were both very curious and eager to learn new things. Thanks, Granddad. It's just so strange here without her. Addie B. brushed away a sudden tear. I know, dear, I know. Her grandfather stood up. Now, how about going to the beach? You go ahead, Granddad, Addie said. I have a good book I'm reading on the Civil War. Her grandfather laughed. You really are like your grandmother. Okay, then. I'll come check on you later. Addie settled down on another window seat covered with yellow-striped cushions that looked out on the tall, straight pine trees that lined the driveway. They were swaying gently in the breeze off the ocean. She had read only one page when she saw Bodie running up the driveway, his chubby cheeks jiggling and his red bathing suit sagging dangerously low. He had no shirt on, but still wore the red cape. Eddie B! Eddie B! He yelled excitedly as he burst through the screen door. We need you, Eddie B. We found this in a cave, and we don't know what it is. And I knew you would know because you're so smart. Despite being interrupted, Addie smiled at Bodie's compliment. He clutched something tightly in his fist. Slowly, he opened it and displayed a small, smooth oval stone the size of a penny. Addie picked it up and held it in her own hand. It looked so familiar, but she did not know why. It's beautiful, she whispered. But what is it? Is it magical? I told them it was magical, but they laughed. Don't you think it's magical? Bodie asked excitedly. Of course it's not magical, Addie said, trying to sound sensible and grown up. You know there's no such thing as magic. It's probably something your brothers put in the cave, just to get me to come out to the beach. Bodie looked at her sadly. Don't you like us, Addie? Why don't you want to go to the cave with us? Besides, I found the stone before Beanie and Jack even got there. Bodie hung his head and turned around to leave. Addie, feeling a little guilty, put a hand on his sunburned shoulder. Wait, Bodie. It is a beautiful stone. Let's find out what it is. Addie scrambled up and went over to the bookshelf in the living room. Grandma Winnie loved books, and she had so many of them, but she also had a complete set of encyclopedias. She never really believed in computers and the internet and stuff like that. I can't believe what I read on a computer, Addie B. Only in good old solid books, her grandmother used to say. Addie found the encyclopedia for G and turned to the page under Gems. There were 2 pages of pictures with different kinds of gemstones. Rubies, sapphires, garnets, topaz, and then she found it. At the bottom of the page, there was a picture that resembled the lustrous stone that Bodie clutched in his hand. Here it is, she said excitedly. It's a moonstone. Really? It came from the moon? Bodie asked excitedly. Addie laughed. No, silly. It's just what it's called because it looks like a tiny moon. Addie scanned over the description. The moonstone is characterized by an enchanting play of light, she read aloud. It has a mysterious shimmer which always looks different when the stone is moved. In earlier times, people believed they could see the moon in the stone. Addie paused and took the stone from Bodie. She held it in her palm and tilted it to see the different shades of color. At first, it was pearly white, and then a blue light, and then a shimmer of pink. She continued reading. Moonstones are from the country of Sri Lanka. This stone is thought to be mysterious and magical. Aha! Bodie exclaimed triumphantly. I told you it was magic. Shh! Addie scolded. Let me finish. In many cultures, it is regarded as a holy, magical gemstone. In India, moonstones are also regarded as dream stones that bring the wearer beautiful visions at night. Suddenly, Addie remembered where she had seen the stone. But how could it be? This is the stone she had dreamed about just last night. She closed the encyclopedia abruptly. Here, she said, putting the stone back in Bodie's hand. You'd better take it back. Whoever lost it might come looking for it. Please come with us, Addie, Bodie pleaded. Please? But Addie wouldn't budge. There was something about the Moonstone in her dream that seemed too scary and unsafe to think about. Besides, it was probably just a trick cooked up by those boys. You keep the stone, Bodhi said sadly. Maybe you'll change your mind. Bodhi finally left, and Addie curled back up on the window seat to continue her reading. But no matter how she tried, she could not get the picture of that beautiful, luminescent stone out of her mind. Chapter 5. The Treasure Box. She knew she was dreaming, but it seemed so real. She saw a young girl wearing a long white dress that swept and flowed around her. Colorful flowers and blue feathers decorated her long dark hair. The girl held out her hand to Addie as if asking her to follow. But follow her where? Addie wondered. The girl seemed like a ghost, but Addie was not afraid. There was something strangely familiar about her. Addie, wake up! She heard her grandfather's voice from far away. Then it got closer. Addie, wake up! You need to wake up so you can sleep tonight. Addie opened her eyes. She had fallen asleep on the window seat. Her book had fallen to the floor, still open to the same page she had been reading when Bodhi came in. Addie stretched and yawned. Okay, Granddad. We're cooking dinner out on the back porch on the grill, so come on out when you're ready. He hesitated for a minute and then sat down next to her. Addie, you haven't gone out all day. Why? Addie shrugged. I don't know. It's just, we used to go together. With Grandma Winnie. It's just not the same. Her grandfather nodded. I know. He seemed to consider something for a minute and then said, Wait here. I have something that I think might help. He went into his study and returned in a few moments with a small wooden box. It had no decoration on it, but it seemed pretty old. There was a small gold clasp on the front, but it wasn't locked. What is it? She held the box carefully in her lap. Addie, this was your grandmother's treasure box. She's had it since she was a little girl. Before she died, she asked me to give it to you when I thought you were ready. Well, I think you're ready now. I think you need it now. Addie rubbed her hand over the top of the box and then held it close to her chest. Thank you, Granddad, she whispered. I'll leave you alone now, he said. When you're ready, come out and join us. Addie's hand trembled slightly as she opened the box. It seemed to contain just a few things that her grandmother had kept as special memories. There was a pressed rose, a bright blue feather, a small locket with the letter W on it, and a few sketches of birds and some flowers. Her grandmother had been a wonderful artist, and the cabin was full of her beautiful paintings. Underneath the sketches was a black and white picture. It was of a young, dark-haired girl in a white dress, her black hair flowing out behind her. She was barefoot and had a bouquet of daisies in her hand. Addie's heart started pounding wildly. It looked just like the girl in her dream. She turned the picture over. It said, Winnie, age 12. Addie couldn't believe it. This was her grandmother at age 12, the same age that Addie was now. How was it possible that she had dreamed about this picture before she even saw it? Addie set the picture aside and continued going through the box. The next item was a poem written in ink on a yellowed piece of paper. It must have been her grandmother's handwriting. In the darkness of the cave, I see the silver moon. Its magic powers call to me. Come here, come near, come soon. I reach for it, but now it's gone. A dream of peace, a far-off song. One day I'll hold it in my hand, and all these dreams I'll understand. One day soon we'll meet again, but now this journey is at an end. Addie held the poem in her hand. Could the cave be the cave her cousins found? Was the silver moon the Moonstone? Had her grandmother actually been to the cave when she was young? She knew her grandmother had grown up near here. She had so many questions, and she knew now what she needed to do. Addie put all the items carefully back into the box along with Bodhi's stone. She quickly ran upstairs to her room and slid the box into the drawer under the window seat. It would be safe there, she thought. She wasn't ready to show the others what was in it. Right now, it was just for her, just between her and Grandma Winnie. Out on the back porch, her grandpa was cooking chicken and seafood on the grill. Her parents and aunt and uncle were in lawn chairs, laughing and talking. Her cousins were out in the yard, squirting one another with water guns. She walked bravely up to them. They stopped shooting abruptly and turned to look at her, as if she had just walked in from another planet. Tomorrow, she said, I want to go to the cave. Her two older cousins simply stared at her, but Bodhi jumped up and down, his red cape flying. "Yay!" he said excitedly. "I knew you liked us." Chapter 6. Moonstone Cave. Amazingly, Addie woke up before her cousins did. It must be jet lag, she thought. Flying over from London near where they lived really messed up her time. She was sleepy during the day and wide awake at night. Sometimes, she wished she didn't live so far away from her granddad and her aunt and uncle. Her father kept telling her it wouldn't be for much longer. "It's up to the company I work for, Addie," he kept saying. But after 3 years there, it was her home. She got out of bed and put on some shorts and a t-shirt. Then she took her grandmother's treasure box and sat by the window. The sun was just coming up, and she reached into the box and held the moonstone up to the orange and pink glow of the sunrise. This morning, the stone looked almost purple. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Addie?" She knew it was Bodhi. He was always the first one awake. Bodhi opened the door. Today, he wore shorts and a sleeveless Batman t-shirt and a red Robin mask that was pushed up on his forehead. He had a plastic sword tucked in the back of his shorts. Addie couldn't help but smile. He was rather cute. "Are you ready to go to the cave, Addie?" "Okay, Bodhi, I'm ready." As an afterthought, she slipped the moonstone into the pocket of her shorts. Who knows, she thought, maybe we'll need it. Downstairs, Jack and Beanie were waiting for them. They handed her a flashlight. She knew they had sent Bodhi to get her because they were a little afraid of her. They knew she wouldn't say no to Bodhi. "Lead the way," Addie said, and they all bounded out the door. Her granddad was on the porch drinking coffee and waved at them as they left. He smiled as if to say, "Good for you, Addie." At the end of the tree-lined drive, the beach circled around the cove to the left. The water was almost gray today. To the right, the view was blocked by a hill of boulders and black craggy rocks. Jack pointed to the top of the hill. "The cave is up there." It took them about 10 minutes of climbing to get to the mouth of the cave. There was no path. They had to jump from rock to rock, and several times Addie slipped, scraping her knee one time and planting her hand in a sticker shrub the next. By the time they reached the cave, she was out of breath and in a bad mood. The boys all seemed in high spirits and were at the top waiting for her. "You're out of shape, Addie," Jack said sarcastically. "Don't you exercise in London? Or do you just go from bus to bus?" She shot him a cold look. "I live outside of London," she replied sternly. However, she didn't want to admit that she really didn't get out and exercise too much. Usually, if she had time, she was inside reading a book. Addie's negative thoughts towards her cousins vanished as soon as she saw the cave. It wasn't a big opening. They all had to stoop to go in except Bodhi. If she spread her arms out, she could touch the sides. They all turned their flashlights on and shone them around the darkness. The ceiling of the cave was surprisingly high. Everything was quiet except for the sound of dripping water. A few stalactites had formed above their heads. "Let's not go too far in," Addie said nervously. Her heart was already pounding from fear. She didn't like dark, damp places. The boys seemed perfectly at ease. She felt Bodhi alongside her, and then he put his pudgy hand in hers. "It's okay, Addie. I'll take care of you." He drew his plastic sword and waved it bravely in front of them. They walked for about 5 minutes, shining their lights all around. It was like being in a strobe light show, Addie thought. Suddenly, Jack stopped and shone his light on an interesting structure. There was a square-shaped rock up against the cave wall, and it looked like a bench. Right above it was a small, oval opening. Something glittered in the opening. Jack walked toward it and started to put his hand in it. "Jack," Beanie said, "be careful." Jack reached in and gingerly touched the object in the opening. "It's metal," Jack said. "It's round and it has some writing on it. I can't read it, though. Addie, you try." Addie shone her light into the opening. There was an inscription right above the knob. Oculos apere. "What does that mean?" Jack asked. Addie thought for a minute. "I think it's Latin. Oculos means eyes. Apere means open. Open your eyes." Bodhi stepped closer to Addie. "How do you know that?" Beanie asked. "I take Latin in school," Addie said with pride. "Ooh, you think you're so smart, don't you?" Beanie teased. She scowled at Beanie in the dark. I am smart. Okay, you two, stop it. So it says, open your eyes, Jack said. What do you think that means? They were all quiet for a moment. Finally, Bodhi said, maybe it opens a secret door? Addie laughed. Bodhi, you're smart too. She reached in and pushed the metal knob. Nothing happened. Then she examined it again. Underneath the writing was a small oval indentation. The shape looked vaguely familiar. Then she remembered. She took the Moonstone out of her pocket. It fit perfectly into the indentation. Suddenly, there was a loud scraping noise. The rock in front of her began to slowly open. A door magically appeared in front of them. Bodhi squeezed Addie's hand. I'm scared, Bodhi said, trembling. Me too, Bodhi, Addie admitted. But they had come this far. Surely, they shouldn't turn back. Even though she was scared, she had a feeling that a wonderful adventure lay ahead of them. An adventure that her grandmother had, a long time ago, experienced as well. Come on, Addie said, summoning her courage. Let's see what's behind this door. Chapter 7. The Journey Begins. I'm not sure we should go in there, Jack said. Addie thought his voice was shaking just a little. Let's just step in and take a look around, Addie said. We don't have to go far. They all looked at one another for a moment in the glow of their flashlights. We all look like pale ghosts, Addie thought with a shiver. Finally, Beanie said, let's go. Surprisingly, he led the way. The secret room reminded Addie of an Egyptian tomb. The ceiling was much lower, and the stone walls curved around them. The room was no bigger than her bedroom at their grandparents' house. They all flashed their lights around the darkness. The space appeared to be empty with no other doors. Well, that's that, Jack said. Let's go. There's nothing here. Wait, it was Bodhi. What's that? They all looked to where he was shining his flashlight. It was a small box with a metal clasp in the middle of the room. It looked just like Grandma Winnie's treasure box. Is it possible, Addie wondered, that Grandma came here when she was little? Addie stepped forward and squatted down in front of the box. It could be a trap, you know, Beanie said. But he moved forward anyway and shone his flashlight over Addie's shoulder. She gently opened the box. Inside was a piece of old parchment paper. It was yellowed and looked very ancient. There was faded black writing on it. It also looked to be written in Latin. Addie hoped she could remember enough from her class to read it. Underneath the paper was a small gold ring with a tiny moonstone set in it. There was also an old rusted key, the kind that looked like it would fit an ancient door of a castle. There was a gold coin with an inscription that said, Patronus. There was also a clear glass ball the size of a large marble. Cool, Bodhi said, reaching for the marble. Wait, Bodhi, Addie said. Let me read this first. The paper had 5 lines on it. The first line said, Unis per orbis has scientia. Addie said this slowly out loud. What does it mean, Addie? Bodhi asked excitedly. He was still eyeing the marble eagerly. I think, Addie began, Unis is 1. Orbis means the ring, I think. Scientia means science or knowledge. She said the words a few times and then stood up with the box in her hands. The one who wears the ring has the knowledge. I suppose that means you, Beanie said. Are you sure it didn't say the know-it-all wears the ring? Shut up, Beanie, Jack said. Go ahead, Addie. Put on the ring. Addie's hand was trembling as she reached in and placed the ring on her right hand ring finger. It fit perfectly. The small moonstone gleamed a pearly white. Cool, Bodhi exclaimed. Now can I have the marble? Let me read some more. Addie started and then stared in amazement at the parchment. The Latin writing was still there, but suddenly, as she watched, an English translation of each line appeared. Did you see that? The Latin just changed, she started to say, but the cousins weren't interested in the mysterious writing. Did they even see the magical translation? Perhaps the ring gave only her the knowledge to read it. She read the next line. The oldest is the protector. Well, I'm the oldest. I guess that's me, Jack said. What do I get? Addie reached in and handed him the gold coin. I guess it's this. It says Patronus on it, which means protector. Jack held the coin in his hand and smiled. Cool. I wonder what or who I'm supposed to protect. Addie read the next line. The one who has the key opens the door. You want the key, Beanie? Beanie frowned at first, and then shrugged. Sure, it's a nice souvenir anyway. There sure aren't any doors around here. The marble's mine, the marble's mine, Bodhi said, jumping up and down and holding out his hand. Addie read the next line. The youngest will light the way. I guess you're right, Bodhi. Here's the marble. Addie placed the marble in Bodhi's plump, sweaty hand. Ooh, look, it's magic! The marble was glowing like a pale full moon. Bodhi held it up. The marble got brighter and brighter. They almost didn't need their flashlights anymore. Shadows danced across the walls all around them. Now what? Beanie said. Addie read the last line of the parchment. Ida iter incipit, she read out loud. The English translation that only she could see appeared next to it. And the journey begins. They were all quiet for a moment, holding their breaths to see what would happen next. But there was only silence all around them. This is stupid, Beanie muttered. There's no door, no place to go. What journey is it talking about? Suddenly, Bodhi started to jump up and down again. Look, a tunnel! They all turned to see where Bodhi was pointing. He was right. In front of them, there was an entrance to a tunnel. None of them had seen it before, but the light from Bodhi's magical marble clearly showed the outline of another dark opening. Let's go, Bodhi said, excited that his marble had led them to a new adventure. Wait, Beanie said. We can't just march down a tunnel that we don't know where it goes. What if we get trapped? He's right, Jack said. We have no idea who put these things here or how long ago. Plus, it's just creepy. Addie sighed. I know, it's scary. Maybe we don't know who put all this here or why, but I think I know someone who's been here before. Someone we knew. Someone we can trust. They all looked at her curiously. What do you mean, Addie? Jack asked. Addie didn't answer for a moment. Then she said, I think it's time I told you about Grandma Winnie's treasure box. Chapter 8. The Garden of Choice. Addie explained about the box that their granddad had given her and told about its contents. When she was finished, the boys were silent for a moment. Finally, Bodhi said, You mean Grandma used to come here? When she was a little girl? Addie nodded. I think so, Bodhi. Jack piped up, If Grandma came here, then surely it's okay for us to be here, right? He looked around at their frightened faces. Then one by one, they nodded. Let's at least see where the tunnel leads, Beanie said. He turned and led the way down the dark opening. Bodhi was next to him, his bright marble leading the way. After only a few steps, they abruptly stopped. It's a dead end, Beanie said over his shoulder. I don't think it goes anywhere. Addie stepped in front of him and began to feel around the rounded end of the tunnel. You're right, she said sadly. It's a dead end. I guess that's the end of our journey. She turned to go back and was stopped in her tracks by Beanie. Look, Addie, there's a light! They all looked to where Beanie was pointing, and sure enough, a thin crack of light shone through the bottom of the tunnel. Addie went back and put her hand by the thread of light. This time, when she touched the wall, it felt different. It felt like wood, not rock. She moved her hand up the wall and jerked back. There's a doorknob here now. I swear it wasn't there before. They all peered at the doorknob in the light of Bodhi's glowing marble. Hey, Beanie exclaimed. There's a keyhole. Maybe my key will... Before he even finished his sentence, he whipped out the key and inserted it in the rusty doorknob. It was difficult to turn, perhaps rusted with time. Here, let me try, Jack said. He turned the knob with both hands, grunting, until the door suddenly began to creak open. Together, they all pushed against it. Finally, it was wide enough for them all to walk through. It's so bright, Bodhi said, covering his eyes. Indeed, the light was dazzling, especially compared to the darkness of the cave. They all shielded their eyes for a moment. Finally, they were able to look around. It was the last thing they all expected to see. They were in some kind of garden. Around the garden rose a tall stone wall, as tall as a 2-story house. The garden was filled with tall blue velvet stalks of flowers, pink and red roses, and thick climbing vines of white flowers. The sweet smell of honeysuckle filled the air. In front of them was a huge gnarled tree, its roots reaching out toward them, its bright green leaves stretching up higher than the wall. All was quiet except for a single tink, tink, tink sound that seemed to be coming from the other side of the tree. What is that? Jack asked. Guys, Beanie said, The better question is, where did the cave go? They all wheeled around at the same time. Beanie was right. The door of the cave, it was nowhere in sight. It was only the other side of the garden. Bodhi grasped Addie's hand. We can't go back, Addie. I'm scared. Addie patted his bright blonde head. We'll get back, she said, with more confidence than she felt. What is happening? Is this another dream? We can't go back, so we might as well go forward, Jack said. Let's find out what that sound is. They all began to walk forward slowly. As they neared the giant tree, the sound became louder. Finally, when they reached the other side, they saw a woman with long, dark hair bent over a stone table. She wore a royal blue dress the color of jewels, and intertwined in her hair were blue and black feathers and small pink and white blossoms. Across her forehead lay a gold chain with a turquoise-colored stone set in the middle of it. She held a small metal tool. She seemed to be working with colored stones, chipping at them to shape them into specific patterns and designs. This was the source of the clinking sound they heard. The woman looked up and smiled. She didn't seem surprised to see them. Addie noticed that she wasn't young, but her skin was smooth and clear, and her eyes were like black marbles. But it was what was sitting next to her that made all the cousins gasp. It was the biggest white wolf they had ever seen. He was so still, Addie thought he was a statue at first. Then he blinked his eyes and continued to silently stare at them. They all took a step back at the sight of him. Hello, wanderers, the woman said, continuing to stand and polish her multicolored stones. I haven't seen any wanderers here for a while. What gate did you come through? The cousins looked confused. Then Bodhi said, The cave! The woman smiled knowingly. Ah, the cave! You know the cave? Eddie asked. Well, I've heard of it, the woman said. There are a lot of ways to come here. The bridge, the waterfall, the statue, and the cave. She smiled, as if they understood what she meant. She continued to work. And where is this? Addie asked, motioning around her to the garden. You don't know? She asked. She picked up a strip of black leather and slid it into a tiny hole of a brown stone with streaks of gold through it. She handed it to Bodhi. Here you go. It's called a tiger's eye. Wear it. It will give you wisdom. Bodhi looked confused, but reached out to take the necklace. What's wisdom? Bodhi whispered to Addie. Gemma overheard him and smiled. It means you'll be able to see and understand things that others can't. Bodhi nodded, still a little confused. You all need to be ready for the journey you have ahead, Gemma said. She began looking through a wooden bowl of different colored stones, purple, blue, red. They seemed to melt into a rainbow of colors. What's this place called? Jack asked abruptly. Addie could tell he was getting frustrated with the woman. And who are you? The woman folded her hands in front of her and looked at Jack patiently. I'm Gemma. I'm the gatekeeper. And this is the Garden of Choice. Jack laughed. Really? He asked sarcastically. This is crazy, Addie. Let's go back. The cave must be back here somewhere. The cave is gone, Gemma said solemnly. The only way out is through one of the doors. She motioned to the wall around them. There are 5 doors in the garden. You have to choose the right one. How do we know which door? Beanie asked. You have to work together, Gemma said. You have to decide together which is the right door for you. You have to study each one and determine which one is the best choice. Jack rolled his eyes. Seriously? Gemma smiled. Seriously. She nodded. That's how it works. There's no other way. Bodhi plopped down on a nearby rock. I want to go home, Addie. Trust in each other, Bowden. You'll get home, Gemma said. Addie and Jack asked at the same time, How'd you know his full name? Gemma smiled. It's my job to know who comes through the garden. I know all of you, and I have a stone for each of you. Except you, Adelaide. You have the Moonstone ring already. Bowden has the tiger's eye. For Jackson, a black onyx. You were the protector. She handed him a similar necklace to Bodhi's, except it contained a simple black polished stone the size of a quarter. Jack eyed it suspiciously and then tied it around his neck. Thanks, he muttered. And for you, Benjamin, Gemma said to Beanie, a carnelian stone to match your red hair. It has many healing properties. Beanie reached out to accept the last necklace. It was a smooth, bright red stone that looked like a large strawberry. No one ever calls me Benjamin, he said. You're in a new place, Gemma said. You're on a new journey. Sometimes it's good to use your full names. And your wolf? Bodhi asked. Is he friendly? The huge white animal remained still, continuing to stare at them. He is Jumani. He is not friendly or unfriendly. He is who he is. He goes where he wants to go, Gemma said. Now it is time for you to move on. Follow the path. It will lead you to the doors. She pointed to the ground in front of them where a worn stone path led away toward the massive wall. Reluctantly, they began to move slowly toward the first door. Addie looked back at the woman, frowning. There was something about Gemma that seemed so familiar, but she couldn't place it. Then it came to her. Gemma looked just like the young girl in her dream, the younger version of her Grandma Winnie. But how could that be? Addie couldn't help but shiver. What had she gotten them into? Chapter 9. The Wrong Way. They had walked only a few minutes on the stone path when Bodhi yelled, "Let's try this one." He was running toward a huge gold door with a large lion head knocker on the front. There were knights and queens and kings carved all over the door. Before they could catch up with him, he reached up and grabbed the knocker. He could barely reach it, but even with slight pressure, the massive door began to creak open. Addie was the first to reach Bodhi. She glanced at the knocker and quickly read the inscription above it. Via Arata, she read, then repeated it. Via Arata. Bodhi, no! She screamed, but it was too late. With the opening of the door, a great wind began to pull at Bodhi's small arms and legs. Quick, Addie screamed, grab him. Help! Bodhi cried. Jack reached out and grabbed him by the waist, trying to pull him back in. The wind began to suck Bodhi's legs out the door. Jack was losing his grip on Bodhi. Help me pull him in, Jack screamed. Addie grabbed Bodhi's legs, trying to bring them back in. It seemed impossible. The wind began to pull at her arms with such great force she thought they would all be lost. Through the opening, she caught a glimpse of storm clouds with funnels reaching down from the dark sky. Sand swirled around them, stinging her arms. She felt Beanie grab her around the waist. Together, inch by inch, they brought Bodhi back in. Push! Jack yelled as they all put their weight against the heavy door. At last, they heard a click, and the golden door closed. The fierce wind was also gone. Only the peace and quiet of the garden remained. Addie looked around, breathing heavily, her heart pounding. Bodhi sat on the ground, his hair standing straight up like he had been shocked, his legs and arms covered in red dirt. Tears ran down his face, making little clear rivers down the mud on his red cheeks. You're okay, buddy, Jack said. We got you. Bodhi leaned against his oldest brother and buried his head in Jack's chest and began to sob. It was gonna take me, he stuttered. What was that? I don't know, Jack said, but you're safe now. Addie plopped down beside them. She rubbed her arm. A long scratch ran the length of it where the door almost closed on it. She shuddered to think what might have happened if they hadn't saved Bodhi. It was the wrong way, she said. Jack glowered at her. No kidding, he said crossly. I mean, that's what it says on the door, the inscription, in Latin. Via Errata. It means the wrong way. It would have been nice to know that before he opened it, Jack said in a stern tone. He could have been killed. I know, Eddie said. I'm sorry. I didn't get here on time. Bodhi lifted his head. Don't fight. It wasn't Eddie B's fault. They sat in silence for a moment, thinking about their next move. Addie looked back by the huge tree, looking for Gemma and the wolf, but they had vanished like ghosts. Great, she thought. We really are on our own. She got up shakily. You guys wait here. I'm going to go around and look at all the doors, see if there are inscriptions on any of the others. Beanie, go with her, Jack ordered. I'll stay here with Bodhi. This place is scary, Bodhi said. I hope there's a way home. You and me both, Jack said, placing a comforting arm around his little brother. Chapter 10. The Sword of Fire. Beanie and Addie began following the stone path again. It seemed to lead around the walled garden from door to door. On either side of the path, tall stalks of purple irises, yellow daylilies, and white daisies waved in the breeze. Several white and yellow butterflies flitted around them, and a fat bee buzzed drunkenly from flower to flower. It's so strange, Addie said. It's so peaceful and beautiful here compared to what might be out there. Beanie was already ahead of her. Look at this, he said, pointing at a blue wooden door with gold metal designs swirling around it. In the middle of the door, there was a gleaming silver sword set in a grove. Wait, Eddie said sternly. Remember what happened the last time we opened a door? But the sword, Beanie cried. It's a real sword. We might need it for protection. What sword? Jack asked, coming up behind them. Bodhi followed him, looking very worn out and tired. If anyone's going to have a sword, it's me. I'm the protector, remember? What does the inscription say, Addie? Beanie asked. Addie stood on her tiptoes to read the writing that was etched into the door right above the sword. Ignis praluciat, she read, and then, just like before, the Latin words translated before her very eyes. Fire lights the way, she said confidently. They were all silent for a moment. Then Bodhi expressed all their fears. I don't want to see fire. They all nodded in agreement. But the sword, Beanie said. Shouldn't we take it? I think Bodhi's right, Jack said. It looks like we can take the sword without opening the door. Everyone step back. Jack, Addie protested, but before she could finish the rest of her warning, Jack had grabbed the sword handle and tried to pry it loose. It won't budge, Jack said, grunting from the effort. Addie examined the sword more carefully. In the middle of it was a round circle the size of a coin. Addie had an idea. Jack, hand me your coin. The one from the box in the cave. Jack took the coin out of his pocket and handed it to Addie. She placed it in the circle on the sword and stepped back. Now try it. This time, the sword began to slide out of the groove easily. Jack worked slowly, all the while keeping his other hand on the doorknob to keep the door closed. Finally, the sword was out, and he turned toward his cousins, smiling, holding the gleaming weapon in front of him. It glistened in the sunlight, its smooth blade razor sharp. Is it heavy? Beanie asked eagerly. Can I hold it? It's not too heavy, Jack said, holding the sword out to his younger brother. Be careful. Beanie held the sword admiringly. It's so cool. We can be real knights now, he said, jabbing the sword out at an imaginary dragon. Suddenly, his face took on a look of shock, and he dropped the sword on the stone pathway with a loud clang. My hand, he screamed. It's burning. Addie grabbed his wrist. His hand was completely red and beginning to blister. It hurts, Beanie cried. It hurts so much. On the ground, the sword still gleamed, but the handle was like a burning coal, and smoke rose eerily from the shiny metal. What do we do? Jack yelled. Addie tried to think while Beanie sat on the ground moaning in pain. Suddenly, she remembered Gemma's words. She leaned over Beanie and removed the necklace from around his neck. Hold out your hand, Beanie, she said. Beanie slowly opened his painful, burning hand, and Addie placed the red stone in his palm. Close your hand over the stone, she said softly. That won't work, Jack said. It's just a stone from a crazy lady. But Beanie suddenly stopped crying and looked at his closed fist. It's working, he smiled, wiping away the tears with his shirt sleeve. It's really working. The cousins all looked on with amazement as Beanie slowly opened up his hand. The burns were completely gone. How'd you know that would work? Jack asked Addie. I didn't, she admitted, but I think Gemma gave us the stones for a specific purpose, so I was hoping. Beanie Stone has healing power. I think because you're the protector, the sword didn't burn you. Do you want to try it again and see? Jack eyed the sword suspiciously and then slowly leaned over to pick it up. He held it still for a moment, feeling the cool metal in his hand. It stayed cool and did not turn into fire. That's great, Beanie finally said. For you, anyway, he said to Jack. Okay then, Jack said. Let's go find the right door and get back home. I've had just about enough of this adventure. They all nodded, making their way down the stone path. Please, please, Addie thought. Help me find the right door. Chapter 11. The Argument. The third door was bright red and had 2 gold lions on it facing each other. The inscription was also in gold and read, Via Potens. The powerful way, Addie translated. Let's go to all the doors this time before deciding, she said. They all agreed. They followed the stone path around a slight curve. Hummingbirds chased each other over their heads, and somewhere in the distance the sound of a small waterfall reached their ears. The fourth door was smaller but seemed to be made of silver. Intricate designs of flowers, beautiful maidens, and unicorns were etched in its shining metal. Wow, Bodhi said. That sure looks like a good door. Addie laughed. Yeah, but we learned our lesson with the gold door. You know, Bodhi said, I suddenly remembered something Grandma Winnie told me. One Christmas, I opened the biggest, brightest present first, and it was just a backpack for school. Grandma Winnie said that not all the best presents come in the brightest packages. That's kind of like the gold door, huh? It looked so pretty, but it was not a good door. Jack patted Bodhi on the head. Very true, he said proudly. They moved on to the last door. As they neared it, larger trees began to appear around them, blocking out the sun's rays and making the pathway appear gray and gloomy. It sent a chill through all of them. The last door was made of plain brown wood. It had a dark, rusted metal knocker, but no knob to open it. Two tall trees had grown up on the wall on either side of the door, like soldiers guarding all who dared to enter. This can't be the right one, Jack said. It's so plain, and it has no knob. Let's go back to one of the others. Wait, Addie said, stepping closer to examine the door. There was no inscription, but under the knocker was a very faint outline of something. She brushed away the dirt off the outline and stepped back. It's a handprint, she said. A small one, like Bodhi's size. There's another one, Beanie said, stepping up by Addie and continuing to brush away the dirt off the door. And another. Finally, the outlines were clear. There were 4 barely visible handprints there. That's just weird, Jack said. Come on, let's go. Wait, Eddie said. I think this is the door, Jack. Jack frowned at her, holding the sword down by his side. Come on, Addie. The plainest, ugliest door, really? It's not just that, it's the handprints. Remember what Gemma said? About working together? And, so? Jack asked. Beanie brightened suddenly. You mean we're all supposed to put our hands in the handprints, he asked? Addie nodded. I think so. I'm not sure, and I know I haven't been sure about anything so far, but I have a feeling this is the right door. Jack glared at her. I think it's your feelings that got us all into this in the first place, Addie. Why should we trust you now? Addie sat down on the trunk of one of the trees. Jack was right. It was mostly her fault they were all in this mess. What if something even worse is behind this door? Could we risk it? They almost lost Bodhi, and Beanie was hurt badly. I don't know, she said quietly. I'm sorry I brought all of you here. I just thought... What? Jack said angrily. To embarrass us? To show you were smarter than all of us with your Latin and your British accent? Or to show that Grandma Winnie loved you the most because she gave you the special box? Jack turned away suddenly, his voice catching. Why was he saying all this? Thinking of Grandma Winnie suddenly brought a deep sense of longing that he had not acknowledged before. He hadn't even cried at her funeral, and yet here he was, tearing up at the thought of his beloved grandmother. He would not let them see him cry. No, Bodhi said, stop it, Jack. It's not like that. I mean, I used to think you were all stuffed up and all, Addie B, but I don't anymore, and I think that somehow we were meant to do all this. Maybe even Grandma Winnie led us here, to remember her or something. They all sat quietly, thinking of Bodhi's words. You may think that, Jack, about being her favorite, Addie finally said, but it's not true. I've always been jealous because you look just like her, like an Indian warrior. And all you got to see her, be with her every year, when I could only be with her every few years. I wish I did live closer. And I'm sorry if you think I'm stuffed up. Stuck up, Jack supplied. Okay, stuck up, Addie said, but I was just raised differently. You guys have one another. I'm an only child. I would love to have a brother or sister like you guys. You guys are so lucky. You always have a friend around. Jack stared off down the path they had just come from, thinking about Addie's words. He noticed it was getting darker. Soon, they would not be able to see the wooden door at all. He sighed and looked at Addie. An Indian warrior, huh? He grinned. Addie smiled and nodded. All right, Queen Addie B. Let's do this. Together. No matter what happens. Okay. Come on, guys. She motioned for them to stand in front of the door side by side, their right hands raised. The first handprint was Bodhi's size. The second fit Beanie's hand perfectly. The third one was for Addie. The last one, the largest one, fit Jack's long, slender fingers. At first, nothing happened. Then they all pressed against the door, and slowly, very slowly, it began to open, creaking against the rusted hinges. There was no strong wind or threatening fire. There was nothing at all. In fact, the path beyond the door was as black as night. Chapter 12. The Dark Path. Uh-oh, Beanie said. This does not look good. Beanie was right. Ahead of them lay a long dirt path, barely visible in front of them. On either side, the dark black shadows and shapes of tall trees stood like angry giants. What do you think? Addie asked Jack. Should we go ahead? They all stood hesitantly. Suddenly, a bright light shone around them. It was Bodhi, his glowing marble in his hand. I'll lead the way, he said bravely. Their decision was made. They began to follow the youngest adventurer. The path seemed to go on endlessly. All was quiet for the first 30 minutes of their walk. It was only gradually that they began to feel that they were not alone and that someone or something was following them. At first, it was only that, a feeling. Then, they began to hear strange sounds, a soft snuffle, the crackle of a branch, and then a soft thud. Bodhi clung to Addie's hand again. "Is it just me? Or was that a scary sound?" he asked, his voice trembling. They all stopped to listen, but heard no more sounds. They continued on, and then, in the distance, another thud and then a grunting sound. This time, they all heard it. Jack wheeled around, holding his sword out in front of him. "Okay, whoever you are, I have a weapon. We know you're there, so come out." All was quiet. "Look," Bodhi said, shining his light toward the darkness beyond the path. Two reddish eyes the size of $half reflected back at them in the light of Bodhi's marble. "What is it? It looks huge." They all began to slowly back away from the glowing eyes, but the eyes kept getting closer, and the crackle of branches was closer as well. Suddenly, a creature the size of it as an enormous buffalo emerged from the darkness. He didn't charge at them, he merely stood staring at them. They were frozen in place, not sure whether or not to run, climb a tree, or scream. It was an animal they had never seen before. Its head was round and pudgy, with cheeks like a bulldog. It had huge tusks that bent down and around his mouth like a walrus. Its ears were small like a hippopotamus's. He was covered in shaggy brown hair, like a mammoth. His eyes were the strangest of all. They were as large as golf balls and the color of emeralds. The creature and the terrified cousins stood motionless, staring at one another. Finally, the creature shook his massive head up and down and said what sounded like humph or grumph or something similar. He stamped one thick, shaggy leg on the ground like a horse would. "What do we do?" Beanie whispered shakily. "Don't move," Jack said. "Maybe he'll go away." But the creature had other ideas. He began to move slowly toward them, his nose in the air, sniffing cautiously. He came closer and closer, within 2 feet, and Bodhi could not hold it in any longer. "Phew!" he said, stifling a giggle. "He smells terrible." The rest of them could not control their laughter. Bodhi was right. The creature smelled like he had been rolling in a swamp. The creature became startled at their laughter and took a step back, looking alarmed. "I think he's as scared of us as we are of him," Jack said. "Let's just all walk backward slowly." Keeping the creature in sight, they began to move down the path slowly. Every step they took, the creature would follow. If they stopped, he stopped. "Think he's hungry?" Bodhi asked. He reached into his pocket and brought out a pack of crumbled crackers. "Let me," Jack said, not wanting Bodhi to get hurt again. He put a cracker on his palm and held it out flat. The creature moved in cautiously and sniffed at it. Then, a long, rough, pink tongue slipped out, curled around the cracker, and sucked it back in. The creature shook his big, shaggy head and stamped his foot. Jack laughed. The tongue had felt like sandpaper. "Got any more of those for us?" Beanie asked. "I'm starving." "Maybe this is a good time to stop and rest," Jack said. "We've been walking for an hour, and there's been no change." They all agreed and sat down at the base of a large tree, its roots stretching out in all directions like long arms. The branches spread out so that there was space for each of them to lean against the bark. Bodhi handed out crackers to everyone, and the creature came closer, sniffing at Bodhi's hands. Bodhi fed him another cracker. "That's all I have," he said to the shaggy animal. "Now go lie down." "He's not a dog," Beanie said. "Don't make him mad." To their surprise, the creature moved a few steps down from them, lowered its head, and closed its eyes. He looked like a huge boulder standing there. "We'll take turns keeping watch," Jack said. "I'll go first. Try to get some sleep." Bodhi put his glowing marble back in his pocket and leaned against Addie B. Darkness surrounded them again, but a buttery yellow moon glided above them, glowing through the dark limbs of the trees. In only a few minutes, Bodhi sank into a deep sleep. Beanie was next. Addie lay awake, listening to Bodhi's soft snores against her shoulder. Jack, the protector, leaned against the tree next to her, one knee up, the sword at his side. Addie fingered the moonstone ring on her finger, rubbing its smooth, pearly stone. It shone like a light pink shell in the moonlight. "Jack," she whispered, "I really am sorry." "I'm sorry too," he said, "about what I said earlier. We all miss her, you know," he said, referring to Grandma Winnie. "Yes," Addie said, "I know." Addie leaned her weary head back to rest. She could hear the strange creature breathing in and out heavily like a giant dog. It was rather comforting, and before she knew it, the rhythm of the creature's snores lulled her to sleep. Chapter 13, The Ghostly Guide. When Addie woke up, it was no longer dark. A soft gray light shone down on them and on the path ahead of them. Beanie and Bodie were both still asleep. Jack had also dozed off and sat with his long legs straight out and his head at an odd angle against the tree. The creature was gone, but she felt as though someone was watching her. She was right. Across the dirt path at the edge of the forest was a large white shadow. At first she thought it was a ghost, and her heart began to race. Then she recognized the eerie figure of Gemma's white wolf, Jumani. He stood motionless, staring at her. What is he doing here, she wondered. Addie thought she was dreaming. She closed her eyes and opened them again slowly. The wolf was gone, but where he had stood, another path had opened up, going deep into the dark emerald trees. Are we supposed to follow him? Addie wondered. Jack, she whispered. Jack was startled and opened his eyes, ready and alert, reaching for his sword. What is it? Gemma's wolf, Addie said, pointing to the new path across from them. I saw him. I think we're supposed to follow him. Jack stood up slowly, stretching. He walked over and peered down the dark path where Jumani had stood. I don't know. I guess we could try it. Addie nudged Beanie and Bodie to wake them up. They both groaned, not wanting to leave their dreams of a cozy bed and soft pillows. Bodie sat up straight and looked around. Where's Jadira? He asked. Jack, Addie, and Beanie all looked at him strangely. Who's Jadira? They all asked at the same time. Bodie blushed slightly. You know, the creature from last night. The one who looks like a shaggy elephant. You named him? Jack asked. Not exactly, Bodie said. He stood up and stretched. It kind of came to me while I was sleeping. Like in a dream? Addie asked. Bodie nodded. Yeah, Gemma was there, and her wolf. And Gemma said the creature's name is Jadira. It means jade because of his green eyes. Addie thought about what Gemma had said about the tiger's eye. It will give you understanding. Perhaps that was what happened in Bodie's dream. Jack shrugged. Oh well, Jadira it is then. They all stared at Bodie for a minute. And something else, Bodie said hesitantly. I think we're supposed to follow Jumani. Addie knew then that Bodie's dream echoed her own. Well, that's 2 votes for following Jumani, Jack said. I guess we should get a move on. Jack led the way, and they began to walk down the path that the ghostly wolf had shown them. At first, the path was very similar to the one they had been on the night before. But gradually, the trees thinned out and opened up into a meadow. The sun was shining again, and it cheered them to be out of the dark trees. Orange and purple wildflowers were scattered across the clearing, and butterflies darted up and down from flower to flower. Addie wanted to stay there and soak up the sun, but she knew they had to keep going. They went on another path through the trees, and suddenly the forest ended, and they looked out on a vast flat landscape of green grass, with blue-gray mountains rising in the distance. For miles there was nothing else. To make it worse, the path branched out in 3 different directions, but they all seemed to head out into the endless landscape. Oh no, Addie said. What now? They all look the same, Beanie said, sighing, and like there's nothing out there. Look, Bodie pointed excitedly. There, it's Jumani. They all looked but saw no white figure. Are you sure? Addie asked Bodie. Yes, Bodie said. He was right there. He stopped for a minute and then disappeared. Addie looked at Jack. Could they trust what Bodie saw? Then Jack shrugged. I guess we're going that way, he said, pointing to where Bodie had seen the silvery creature. Bodie smiled, pleased that they believed him. They began to walk the path where their ghostly guide had been. The dusty trail quickly began to descend downhill as if they were coming down from a mountain. Addie turned to look behind her. She could no longer see the forest at all, only sloping hills. Large rocks began to appear alongside the path until they rounded a curve, and the path abruptly ended at 2 enormous boulders. In between, connecting the boulders, was a stone arch. To the side, a waterfall spilled out over the boulders and rushed down the side of gray and tan rocks. The path quickly became a jagged, slippery trek. Should we keep going? Jack asked Addie, lifting Bodie down carefully from a steep ledge. He had to speak loudly so she could hear him over the roar of the waterfall. Addie looked around, concerned. Was this really the right way? Was Jumani truly leading them home? I don't think we have a choice, she said. I think we have to trust Jumani. And Bodhi, she added, patting her youngest cousin on the shoulder. Bodhi beamed with pride. Look, there he is! Bodhi pointed high above them, on a thin ledge up the craggy mountain. The others saw nothing, but Bodhi saw the snowy white figure, calm and reassuring. The cousins continued on the path down the dark rocks. At the bottom of the waterfall, the water changed to a smooth, clear stream. The ground was flat again. There was no path, but they walked beside the water's edge comfortably. At last, a huge glade opened in front of them, but it was surrounded by a great wall of rock all around. They had nowhere else to go. They were trapped. "Oh no," Bodhi whimpered. "We're never getting home." "Come on, guys," Jack said. "We said we trusted Jumani, so let's look around for a way out, an opening or tunnel in the rock somewhere. He wouldn't lead us here for no reason." They spread out, but not too far, in case one of them got into trouble. Bodhi went to the left, his plastic sword out in front of him, poking along the slab of rock. There was nothing. Jack went straight ahead, reaching his hands up as high as he could to feel for an opening of some kind. All he felt was hard, smooth stone under his hands. Beanie kicked at the big rock, hoping to find a hidden path. Addie went to the far right of the rock wall. There was no opening, but there was a pile of round stones, most of them the size of basketballs or bigger. "Bring me your marble, Bodhi," she called. Bodhi hurried over, brandishing his shiny light. Addie took it and slipped her arm down into the crevice of the stones. With the light, she could see a small cavern. The stones were covering an opening to a tunnel or a cave. "Help me," she called to Jack. She tried to lift one of the stones, but couldn't. It was too heavy. Jack was beside her then, also straining to pick up one of the stones. He fell back, out of breath. "It's no use. Those stones are way too heavy for us to move." They all sat, staring at the huge pile of immovable rocks in front of them. "What now?" Beanie asked. No one answered. No one had an answer. It was Bodhi who first heard the familiar snuffling sounds. He looked around, and coming down the path where they had been was the giant furry creature. "It's Jadira," Bodhi said, pointing. They all jumped up to greet their friend from the forest. Jadira shook his huge head and stamped his elephant-sized feet. He sniffed at Bodhi's pocket for crackers. "I'm sorry," Bodhi said. "I'm all out." "Here," Jack said, fishing into his own pocket. "I didn't eat mine. Maybe we can convince Jadira to help us move the rocks." He held out his crumbled cracker to the hairy beast and began to back up towards the stones. "Come on, buddy," Jack coaxed. "Come help us." When Jadira was close enough to the pile of rocks, Jack sprinkled the cracker crumbs on top of them and down into the crevices. Immediately, Jadira began to root around and sniff at the rocks. His huge tongue curled out, trying to lick up the crackers. Impatiently, he stamped at one of the rocks and sent it rolling down the pile. "That's it," Bodhi said. "Keep looking for that cracker." Jadira caught one of the boulders with his huge tusks and pulled it aside as easily as a child with a toy. He did this again and again until, at last, he had opened up a hole large enough for them all to crawl through. Jadira stuck his head in the hole and came up with the last bit of cracker, licking his lips with his fat pink tongue. "He did it!" Bodhi cried, jumping up and down. "Now we need to find out what's down there," Jack said. "You guys wait here. Bodhi, where's your marble?" Jack took Bodhi's glowing glass stone and began to descend down the hole. "You guys wait here. I'll be right back." "Be careful, Jack," Addie begged. Jack nodded. He disappeared down the opening. The last thing they saw was the gleam of the tip of his sword. "What is that over there?" Beanie asked suddenly, pointing to a dark shape halfway up the jagged rock wall. Was it Jumani watching from the shadows? Suddenly, the shape began to move, hopping easily from ledge to ledge. It was coming toward them. And it was not Jumani. It was a huge gray wolf, its steely eyes glinting. The wolf stopped a short distance away and emitted a low, dangerous growl. The cousins stood like statues, afraid to move. Addie's heart was pounding. Jadira stamped his foot in the grass, as if in warning. "Hey guys!" they heard Jack call from the pile of rock. "There's a door. I think it's a way out. Come on." Jack poked his head up out of the hole just as the gray wolf began to walk toward them, snarling angrily. Saliva dripped from the side of his mouth, his yellow teeth like spikes. Jack leaped out of the hole to stand between his cousins and the fierce creature, waving his sword. His heart pounded with fear. "Get away!" he yelled, but the wolf kept coming. Jack's hand shook, but he kept staring at the wolf, never looking away. The gray monster sprang into the air right at Jack. He heard his cousins scream his name, as he swung his blade at the menacing creature coming toward him. He felt the blade make contact with the wolf's side and heard a yelp. And then he felt his own pain. The wolf had landed a solid bite on his arm, causing him to drop the sword. They faced each other, both bleeding and wounded. What was he to do now? He couldn't reach his sword. He saw the silvery shadow behind the gray wolf, just as his cousins yelled, "It's Jumani!" This time, they all saw his gleaming, snowy white form. The gray wolf turned to face his other opponent. He was larger than Jumani. The stiff hair on his back bristled up as he bared his menacing teeth. Jumani simply stared at his enemy, unblinking. They both charged at the same time, colliding in midair, a white ghost twisting and turning, intertwined with the dark gray mass. Fangs and teeth snapped. There would be no winner here, Jack thought. The fight seemed to go on and on. Suddenly they parted, circling each other. The gray wolf was limping, its side a tangled mass of hair and blood. But Jumani was hurt too. Against the pearly white fur, a red stain began to spread. Before the gray wolf could pounce again, Jadira stepped up. He scooped the gray wolf up in his giant tusks and tossed him easily into the air. The wolf landed with a thud and lay there, stunned. Slowly he rose, took one last look at his enemies, and trotted away. He was outnumbered. They all ran toward Jack. "Are you okay?" Jack waved them off. "I'll be alright. Check on Jumani." Addie looked up. Jumani had slumped to the ground, his eyes closed, his breathing weak. She walked slowly toward him. "What should we do?" She leaned down, stroking his soft fur, murmuring to him, Thank you for saving us." She felt tears begin to stream down her cheeks and drop onto Jumani's beautiful silvery white coat. She felt Beanie next to her. He took his healing stone from around his neck and placed it on Jumani's wound. "Maybe," he said, also fighting back tears, "maybe it will work again?" But the great white creature who had fought so bravely to save them was motionless. Perhaps, Addie thought sorrowfully, some wounds could not be healed. Chapter 14, Journey's End. Addie wasn't sure how long she kneeled over Jumani, stroking him, willing him to breathe. It seemed like forever. Then she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder and looked up. It was Gemma. Addie stood up and wrapped her arms around Gemma's waist. She began to sob. I'm so sorry. Gemma patted her gently. "It's okay, Adelaide. He'll be okay. We all have second chances here." Gemma broke away from Addie, kneeled down, and gave her white guardian a gentle kiss, whispering something softly in his ear. For a moment, Jumani lay still and lifeless. Then, as Addie and her cousins watched in amazement, Jumani's blue eyes flickered open. Slowly he began to stand up, his long legs wobbly. The red wound on his side had completely disappeared. "How?" Addie started, but Gemma put a hand up to stop her questions. "There are things you do not need to know, Adelaide. There are some mysteries you are not ready to understand," Gemma said. Addie nodded, accepting Gemma's explanation. It was enough that their brave white guardian was alive and by Gemma's side once again. "Now," Gemma said, motioning toward the opening where Jack had recently emerged, "it's time for all of you to go home. You've reached the end of your journey." Yes, Addie thought, it was time to go home. Before they went down into the tunnel, they took turns hugging and saying goodbye to their new friends. Bodhi brushed the scraggly hair away from Jadira's jade-colored eyes and planted a kiss right on his damp nose. "You still smell bad, Jadira, but thank you." Jadira shook his massive head and stamped his foot, taking one last hopeful sniff at Bodhi's pocket. Gemma wrapped Jack's arm with a soft white cloth. "It will heal quicker than you think," she said. "You are a brave warrior." Addie could see Jack blush, even under his dark features. No one hugged Jumani. It wasn't his way. He stood, silent and strong, by Gemma's side. Addie thought she saw him nod one time, ever so slightly, as if to say goodbye, but she couldn't be sure. Jack lowered Bodhi down the dark hole first, instructing him to hold his marble up high and lead the way, just as he had throughout their adventure. Beanie was next. He turned, waved to their new friends, and brushed a tear away from his eyes before anyone could see. Gemma had returned his fiery red stone to him, and the sun glinted off it as he descended once more into the depths. "Queen Addie," Jack smiled, motioning for her to go next. The warrior always goes last, he laughed. Addie lowered herself into the opening. It wasn't deep, and her feet found the earth beneath her easily. Her head peeked up above the rim, and she waved goodbye. Gemma leaned over and whispered to her, "One day soon we'll meet again, but now this journey's at an end." With those last words swirling in her mind, Addie B dropped into the darkness, the smell of the damp earth enveloping her. Jack was right behind her. They walked through a short, dark tunnel that ended at a wooden door. "Not another door," Beanie exclaimed wearily. "Would these doors never end?" "Try your key, Beanie," Jack said. Beanie took out the rusted metal key and inserted it in the lock. It turned easily. He pushed, and the door slowly opened. The first thing they noticed was the smell of the salty ocean air and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. The sun was blinding after the blackness of the tunnel. "We're home! We're home!" Beanie and Bodie whooped and hollered and began to scramble down the rocky face of the cliff. They were right. This was the cliff they had climbed up on to reach the Moonstone cave. Was it just yesterday? Addie wondered. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Addie turned to look behind her. There was no door, no tunnel, and no cave. But she was not surprised. Jack turned to her. "Look!" He held up his arm. The bandage was gone, and there was no sign of his injury. "But my sword is gone," he said sadly. "Maybe you don't need it here. You only needed it there," Addie said. "At least you still have your necklace." She looked down at her Moonstone ring, glad to still have this memory of the mysterious garden, the beautiful Gemma, and her wolf. Her ring shone like a luminescent pearl on her finger. They began to slowly descend the rocky cliff. "I think," Addie said, "we had better not tell our parents about this. I don't think they would believe us." "I don't even believe it," Jack said. "Did it really happen? It seems like a dream." A few minutes later, they were walking down the familiar tree-lined driveway toward their granddad's house. Addie stopped just before they stepped onto the porch. "Jack," she said, "what Gemma said to me as I left, it was from the poem that was in Grandma Winnie's treasure box. How did she know it? Do you suppose—" She stopped. "Do you suppose Grandma Winnie went there, or that Gemma is—" She stopped again. None of it made sense. "I don't know, Addie, but I think Grandma Winnie was with us through the journey somehow, and it helps to know that she's still around, watching out for us." They stepped into the house. Bodie and Beanie were talking excitedly to their grandfather. "And a cave, then there was a white wolf, and we spent the night in the forest." The grandfather stood smiling, a set of towels under one arm. "That sounds like quite an adventure. You know you were only gone about 30 minutes, don't you?" The cousins stared at him. "But how? Anyway," Grandpa patted Bodie on the head, "let's go to the beach. Your parents are waiting for you there." Bodie and Beanie headed out the door. Jack shrugged, smiled at Addie, and followed his brothers. Grandpa turned to Addie. "Are you coming, Addie?" Addie nodded. "I'll be there in a minute. You go ahead. I have to do something first." Her grandpa put an arm around her and squeezed. "Okay. Did you meet anyone interesting on your adventure?" He winked at her and smiled. Addie nodded. "I think you know I did, Grandpa. One day you'll tell me all about it." After her grandfather left, Addie went up to her room, looking around at all the familiar things she wasn't sure she would ever see again. The yellow bedspread with the white flowers, her doll, Lady Anne, and the beautiful picture of her grandmother. She looked so similar to Gemma, she thought again. What a mysterious adventure it had been. "I wonder," she thought sadly, "will I ever get to go back? Or is this a once-in-a-lifetime adventure that I would slowly forget, only recalling a few distant memories to share with my own grandchildren?" Addie pulled a drawer out from under the window seat and brought out her grandmother's treasure box. She slid the Moonstone ring off her finger and placed it down in between the shells, the feather, and her grandmother's poem. The Moonstone gave off a silvery glow. Until next time, she thought. Addie placed the treasure box back in the drawer and closed it. Then she headed for the beach to spend a very ordinary day with her family. After their exciting and dangerous journey, ordinary sounded like a perfectly nice thing to be. The end. And now, let's get back to that studio! Thanks, Cait on location. And now it's review time with Cait. That's me. I gotta tell you guys, I loved that book. I felt so close to those kids by the end. Felt honestly like I was a part of their family. Especially the littlest one, Brody. How cute was he? I was so worried about him when he almost got sucked into that weird, like, stormy door thing. And then the other kid went and burned his hand. I was just so relieved when they got out of there okay and they got home safe and sound. I thought it was super creative. I loved the fantasy elements, the imagination that it took. I liked how it really, there was a lot of heart in that story as well. You could tell that these kids were really missing their grandmother. It was a great story about family. There was tension between them, but at the end of the day, they came together to work together. Awesome book. And I'll tell you what, I am definitely going to go out and purchase the second book of the Heath Cousins series, The Heath Cousins and the Kingsgate Bridge. Can't wait to see what that's about. On my last episode, I mentioned that I was going to be giving away 2 books. Here they are, Sammy the Not So Scary Snake and The Unladylike Ladybird. And the winner of these 2 books is Dawn Dextrace! Woo! Way to go, Dawn! Thanks so much for commenting. I hope you guys enjoyed the first season of Storytime with Cait as much as I did. I know I had an absolute blast. I am going to be filming some over the summer. We'll be back airing these episodes in the fall. Please come back and join us. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be a blast. Thank you so much for a spectacular first season of Storytime with Cait. That's me.
Thanks, Storytime for Cait. I was the lucky winner of my Thanksgiving story, the story for November. You guys do a great job. Look forward to more. Thanks.
Gather round, children, long after wait. There'll be fun and adventure for all. Storytime with Cait. A world of imagination is there for you to take. All you gotta do is listen. It's story time with Cait. It's story time with Cait.
Thank you, Storytime with Cait. I loved the book.